The human experiment has ended. The earth has been obliterated. A plague of cholera burns through the outer colonies, and the last of the great houses drifts at the edge of the Kuiper Belt, carrying a macabre secret. The only thing standing between Twilight House and the death of all living things is Fort Providence Transit Station on the dark side of Pluto's largest moon. The Ghosts of Pluto. Octoberpod presents an audio drama written by M.J. McAdams, produced, edited and directed by Edward October. Coming this February.
Hello and welcome to Reverie True Crime. I'm your host, Paige. Before we get into today's episode, I wanted to let you know about two upcoming events. One is my online live show. My guest co-host is JT from Brew Crime. We both hope that you all can come hang out with us on Sunday, February 12th. If you are interested in deep dives into cases and like discussing cases with others, you will be right at home at this live virtual experience. You can talk to us as we go along, ask questions, as well as talk to others in the chat. You can get your tickets at moment.co/reverie true crime. That's moment.co/reverie true crime. There will be an after party where we will be having a great time telling you crazy news stories from around the world to lighten up the mood after going through such a heavy case. There will be a lot of laughter and shenanigans at the after party. The other event I wanted to tell you all about is the True Crime and Paranormal Podcast Festival in Austin, Texas. It starts on the 25th of August and lasts until the 27th. You'll meet some of your favorite podcasters, survivors, advocates, and families who have had their loved ones taken from them. It's sure to be a very good time with very emotional moments, as so many people will be speaking about heavy topics, tragic experiences, their struggles, their triumphs, and more. But we also promise a lot of fun in between, and we cannot wait to meet you in person. You can go to truecrimepodcastfestival.com to see more and order your tickets. Now, on to the show. Today's episode is about Henry Louis Wallace, who was labeled the Taco Bell Strangler, and the victims whose lives he so relentlessly and senselessly stole. Let's get started. Henry Louis Wallace was born on November 4th, 1965 in Barnwell, South Carolina to Lottie Mae Wallace. Lottie worked in a sock factory, spending many long hours at work. According to Henry, when she was at home, she spent her time giving him verbal lashings. Allegedly, Lottie would constantly judge and criticize everything he did, and in her eyes, he never did anything right. However, she did have a lot on her plate, and we will learn more about that later. She was under a lot of stress and got onto her kids when they did something wrong, but Henry may or may not be making up the abuse. Henry also had a sister who was 3 years older than him named Yvonne, and loved ones usually called Henry Bubba as a child. Henry was a student at Barnwell High School where he was on the student council. He was also the only male cheerleader. He played one season of junior varsity football and basketball. Patty Funderburk was a fellow cheerleader who said, quote, "I remember he was very nice, considerate, very well dressed all the time. We never felt uncomfortable around him. We trusted him totally." However, it was not all flowers and rainbows being a black young man on a squad of all white girls. The cheerleaders wanted a male student to help them with jumps, stunts, and chants. When Henry tried out, he won, and as a senior, he had become the captain of the cheer team. In the beginning, a few cheerleaders did not want a black boy touching them during the routines. Henry was not bothered, but he cared about how they felt. So much so that he went to the cheerleading coach to see if there was anything at all he could do to make it easier and more comfortable for them. As time went on, the girls trusted him. There was a mean group of kids who would call him the F slur for being a cheerleader, but Henry was the type of kid that didn't care what anybody had to say. Lisa Mundy was a cheerleader with him and said, quote, "It had to be a lot for a man to be a cheerleader. We really thought he was special. He even went to cheerleading camp with us one year. He was as nice as he could be. The girls from the other towns just loved him." Henry graduated high school in 1983. After high school, Henry started driving a school bus and then DJing on the weekends and weeknights for a local radio station on and off for about a year and a half. Drew Wilder was the owner of the radio station and said that Henry was respectful and had good manners, but he had to fire him after he found out there were a few CDs missing. One girl who was in 5th grade when Henry drove her school bus, but was a college student when she was interviewed, said, quote, "He had a sexy voice over the radio. I had a crush on him way back when. He was so fine." Henry's mother said he spent a semester at South Carolina State College and one semester at Denmark Technical College, but neither college would confirm that he attended. Henry joined the Navy in 1984 and was a weapons technician on the USS Nimitz. He was stationed in Bremerton, Washington. While in the Navy, he began participating in illegal activities, and this is when his problems kicked off. Henry started using a plethora of drugs, crack cocaine being his drug of choice. By being in the Navy, he was able to see a lot of the world, from Seattle to South Africa. He signed up to do a 4-year stint, but by his 3rd year, he had not gone up in rank. He was still a weapons tech and had a low classification of E3. It was in July of 1987 when he was on leave. He went home and then married his high school sweetheart, Moretta Brabham, and they had a really nice ceremony at Moretta's house. In January of 1988, while still stationed in Washington, he was caught red-handed trying to steal a VCR, television, and microwave. He was arrested in the middle of the robbery. Henry was charged with second-degree burglary and sentenced to probation after pleading guilty in June and spending 38 days in jail. A little while later, he was charged again for violating his probation. The Navy discharged Henry, categorizing it as less than honorable. He did not show up to the mandatory meetings with his probation officer. Instead, Henry went back to his hometown of Barnwell in 1989 without his probation officer knowing. He then got a job as a chemical operator for Sandoz Chemical Company. A spokesperson from the chemical plant said he did, quote, average work, nothing remarkable. He worked there from May of 1989 to October of 1990. In 1989, his marriage to Moretta also ended, and she has never spoken out. Eventually, Henry called his probation officer to let him know he had moved back to Barnwell into his mother's home. South Carolina's probation officers were asked to supervise Henry. 7 months went by, and the South Carolina officials were irritated because Henry was not being cooperative. They no longer wanted to deal with the responsibility for things that happened in Washington. Henry's probation officer got another arrest warrant for him in January of 1990, and nothing ever came of it. Henry committed his first murder in 1990. 18-year-old Tashonda Bethea was a student at the same high school Henry went to. After he killed her, he disposed of her body in a pond in his hometown of Barnwell. Her corpse was found a few weeks later in a pond by a little boy who was going there to fish. The police went to Henry and asked him questions about Tashonda, her disappearance, and death. Henry was the last person to be seen with her before she went missing. He would not admit to her murder until years later, though, when more details emerged. In April of 1990, Henry was arrested for assault with intent to commit sexual conduct with a minor in Allendale, South Carolina. Police found Henry in a motel room holding down a 16-year-old child named Eartha Brown, trying to rape her in May. Henry was indicted by a grand jury. There are two different stories, one from the victim and one from the police about this incident that we will get into. Henry went to Eartha's house one night and invited her to go riding around with him. They sort of knew each other through mutual acquaintances, so she figured he was a safe person if her friends liked him. So they went to 2 clubs that night in Allendale. He bought her a few beers and said, "Hey, do you want to go watch some TV?" And she said yes. Henry drove to the Rainbow Motel, signing in with a fake name, and even told Eartha they could take the TV from the room. Eartha told a journalist, quote, "I asked if I could go to the bathroom, and when I came out, he started choking me, threw me on the bed, and started to undress me. Eartha resisted, but then he pulled out a gun, placing it against her head, and he said, 'I'm going to kill you.' Instead, he jerked her up out of the room and drove her home. In the very same newspaper, though, police claimed they pulled up to the motel a few minutes after Henry did, and they heard a girl screaming for dear life, supposedly busting into the room, saving Eartha, and driving her home. So it's truly all a confusing mess. Eartha's mother swore out a warrant for Henry's arrest not even 2 days later. Eartha was 20 years old in 1994 when she finally opened up about the traumatizing incident. Henry had a warrant out for his arrest in October of 1990 for failing to appear in court on those charges. That warrant would still be in the system for years, and nobody ever caught it. There were also police who said the charges never showed up on a criminal history background check the next time Henry would be arrested. The lieutenant said if they would have known he was facing charges, they definitely would have held him. But that's outrageous. Something like that can happen. So many lives would have likely been saved. There were a lot of arguments between what Eartha and her mother said versus what the cops' stories were. Police claimed that Eartha and her mother said they did not care about him going to jail, that they just wanted him to stay away from them, agreeing not to prosecute Henry. Police basically called them liars when they spoke out and said that's not what happened at all. Eartha's mother, Annette, said, quote, "I said I would not drop the charges, that I wanted him behind bars." She said Henry's mother, Lottie, even begged her to drop the charges against her son, and Annette refused. She said, quote, "I told them no. She could have been dead." Now, that sounds like the truth to me. I can't see any mama bear letting this kind of thing go. What is really odd is there's no record of Henry being put on a pretrial intervention program. They only have the word of the 14th Circuit solicitor who said he was put on PTI, but the prosecutors were reinstated after Henry finished the program. But those files are missing a lot of information. Disappointing but not surprising gross behavior towards a victim and lazy police work. They went on not to believe a 16-year-old victim at the time because they did not know if Henry had a gun or not. It was her word against Henry's, and if they had found a gun in the motel room, Henry definitely would have been put on PTI. But with the way the rest of these investigations go, I do have a hard time believing a lot of what the police say. If Eartha's story is true, and I believe she was being truthful, according to her, Henry pulled her out of that room and took her home, not the police, and she never even mentioned the police pulling up at the motel. So how would they know if Henry had a gun or not? Also, I cannot imagine being 16 years old, having a shouting match, as the police called it, with my attacker, and then the cops not even listening. The thought of what she went through just truly pisses me off. Not to mention, the police brought up the fact that allegedly they'd both been drinking and there was no physical evidence that Henry was trying to rape her. Henry's crime sprees continued as he broke into the radio station he used to DJ at and Barnwell High School in February of 1991. He got his hands on a camcorder and microphone. Those items were expensive. Henry was busted as he was trying to pawn the equipment, ultimately only spending 3 months in the state prison after being charged with 4 counts of larceny and burglary, which he was sentenced to 10 years for, suspended to 1 year in confinement and 3 years probation. To have that reduced to 3 months, he really got off easy. Again, they claimed that the arrest warrant did not show up in the background check. Henry went on to live with his sister Yvonne after he was released, and in November of 1991, he moved to East Charlotte, North Carolina, and he never lived in one place in the area very long. He would move from one apartment complex to the next. Henry would go on to work at many fast food places. He eventually landed the manager's position at Taco Bell. He was also the assistant manager and cook at Bojangles, Captain D's, and Black Eyed Pea, and all of these fast food places were around the area of the Eastland Mall. A 19-year-old cook at Captain D's said he worked with Henry for about a month before Henry quit in 1993, and he said they would just talk about girls and sports, nothing strange or unusual. Henry was questioned in Rock Hill, South Carolina, about a 17-year-old girl, a mother of one, who lived in a home for troubled girls in Barnwell after she had been arrested for shoplifting. She had been kidnapped and raped. Henry was the suspect of threatening this teenager with a gun and forcing her to get into his car and raping her on February 21, 1992. The victim, Keber Lewis, said he pointed a gun at her and told her she better not jump out of the car. After telling police all of this, she left them all of her information, but no one ever got back to her. Henry was in fact the one that did this. Keber went to Piedmont Medical Center where she had a rape exam done, and they kept the clothes she was wearing for evidence. The teenager said they never returned her clothes to her. Henry turned himself in and was charged for kidnapping and rape, but he was let go on his own recognizance the same day. The 16th Circuit Solicitor Tommy Pope did not understand why Henry was released because that was not something that normally happened in a case involving kidnapping and raping someone. However, Tommy said he was not there for the bond hearing or anything else, so he did not consider himself to be in the position to judge or make a strong opinion about something he did not know all the facts of. Court officials provided information that said authorities called this case a, quote, very questionable rape case, a case of date rape. Keber said she was walking at night, it was cold, and Henry asked her if she needed a ride, and she accepted. Henry was an acquaintance of a friend of hers, so she knew his face, but didn't really know him personally. Keber was wanting to go to this club called Rock Hill Lounge, but instead, Henry kept driving. She was really scared and was about to jump out of the car when he pulled the gun out and told her she better not even think about it. From there, he drove out to a wooded area on a dead-end road and raped her. When he finished, Keber said he just started mocking her, making fun of her because she thought the gun was a revolver, but it was a BB gun that looked like one. Henry told her to get in the driver's seat and drive. She began to drive in a way that was a little erratic, like a drunk driver, praying that they would pass police and they'd pull them over, but that didn't happen. Keber drove to her friend's house, and she was lucky enough to get the license plate number of his car and called the police. When Keber found out that Henry was released, she moved out of town because she was terrified that he would come looking for her. She heard from others that Henry told them he was going to kill her. So she took off with her little baby boy and stayed with the little boy's father's mother until she was able to move into a housing complex. And at that time, she also had a 15-month-old little girl named Keandra. Henry's trial date for the kidnap and rape was supposed to be on April 6, 1992. but he had not had any interactions with court officials about the kidnapping and rape since the month prior, and he never would again. This is when his murder spree began. In May of 1992, Sharon Nance was 33 years old. She sold drugs and had been convicted before. She was also a sex worker. Sharon was born in Charlotte, North Carolina, and her grandfather raised her there. At the age of 15, she dropped out of junior high. She started hanging around a crowd who were bad influences on her, which is when her drug use and trouble began. Between 1975 and 1992, she had faced 61 charges, including minor traffic offenses, assault, drug, and weapon charges, and Sharon had just recently been let out of prison. The family hated that the media seemed to only focus on that aspect of her life, which is really shitty that they did that. None of those things makes her a bad person or any less of a victim, and that's not all there was to her life or her as a person. Sharon's sister, Doris, said, quote, "Regardless of what she had ever done, she was the best person I ever knew." Sharon loved to draw, write poetry, and was devoted to her son, who she loved with every fiber of her being. She was the type of person who would do anything she could for anyone. In late May, Sharon left her aunt's home wearing a black dress and had said she was going out to see her friends. Allegedly, she somehow saw Henry that day and rendered her sexual services to him. She simply asked afterwards about receiving her money. What we know for sure, no matter the circumstances, is that he did beat Sharon Nance to death, and she was the only victim he did not personally know. After Henry murdered her, he dumped her body along a railroad track on Rozelle's Ferry Road. Sharon's Aunt Linda started to worry when she didn't hear from her niece, and she never came back. A week later, May 27th, Linda saw the news reports that a young woman in a black dress had been found, and she knew then that was their sweet Sharon. The family was devastated, and they would not know what really happened to her or who did this to her for almost 2 years. 20-year-old college student Caroline Love was a close friend of Henry's then girlfriend. Caroline and the girlfriend were roommates, and Caroline was employed at a Bojangles fast food chicken joint. Caroline was hired as a cashier in September of 1989, and when her shift was over around midnight on June 15, 1992, she would never walk back inside of her workplace again. Her apartment was at the Darby Terrace complex 6 blocks away, and she started walking home. The manager of the Bojangles, Terry Bazakis, would schedule Caroline to work all the night shifts that he worked because, quote, "She did her job, never gave me any problems, she could stretch out and pick up a little extra, and never really complained about it." Caroline was a hard worker, and the manager loved her work ethic. She was usually quiet, but she was also a character. She would go to work, bebopping in the door with her headset on, listening to rap music and just vibing. The manager, Terry, also said that if Caroline had a hair appointment on her day off, you could forget trying to call her into work. You could not get Caroline to miss a hair appointment. He said that she would spend about 5 hours at the salon, and you never knew what kind of hairstyle she would get. Caroline's sister, Kathy, worked at the Bojangles as well. The next day, Kathy did not hear anything from Caroline. Neither did Henry's girlfriend, who was worried because she wasn't there at the apartment the next day. Kathy and Henry's girlfriend went to the police station and filed a missing persons report. Kathy told the police some things that had been going on that made her think her sister could be in danger. Caroline's uncle and a man named Juan had been sending her death threats. Kathy said that Caroline refused to date Juan, so I'm not sure if that's why she was getting the death threats or how her uncle is involved, but Kathy was rightfully scared about that. Oh, one other small little detail. Henry also tagged along with the young ladies to the police department when they filed the missing persons report. Henry was there hearing all of this, knowing Caroline's uncle and Juan did not have anything to do with this situation. He was hearing how scared Kathy and his own girlfriend were, but he knew what happened. Caroline was raped and strangled to death by Henry, with most sources saying in her apartment, which she shared with Henry's girlfriend. So it does make me wonder if his girlfriend wasn't there. Was she possibly at Henry's apartment spending the night and he left to go do this? That part is just weird to me, but I don't believe or want to believe his girlfriend knew. After he took Caroline's life, he took her body and dumped her in the woods where nobody would know where she was for years. Police did question Henry about Caroline since her roommate was in a relationship with him and the fact that he worked with Caroline. But nothing struck them as odd and he didn't rise to the level of a suspect. 20-year-old Shauna Hawk was a college student at Central Piedmont Community College on her way to becoming a paralegal. She worked under Henry at Taco Bell. He was her supervisor. Years before she worked at Taco Bell, when she was 14, she fibbed about her age and was hired part-time at McDonald's. Shauna worked there for a year and would give her entire check to her mother, saying, "Mommy, here it is for meals." When she was in high school, she was extremely shy and she didn't get into any of the school's activities. Her mother, Dee Sumter, said that she was your average good kid. On February 19, 1993, Shauna was all dolled up and had on the fanciest clothes she had ever worn in her life as she was on her way to junior prom with her date in his Mercedes. Shauna's mother described her daughter as unpretentious and never being anything other than her authentic self. That night, when Shauna got home, Henry made his way in, raping and strangling her to death. Eventually, Dee went to her daughter's house, calling out for her, walking around the apartment, and then she found her. Shauna's corpse was in her bathtub that had been filled with water. Henry had the gall to even go to her funeral. Shauna's mother, Dee, recalled Henry hugging her and giving his condolences. 4 months went by, as far as we know, before Henry killed again. Still working at Taco Bell, he targeted another woman who worked there as a manager. 24-year-old Audrey Spain had been raised in a small town by her parents, Broughton and May Helen Spain, who had 6 children, and Audrey was the youngest. Her parents would always call her baby. Audrey decided to move away to the big city of Charlotte, North Carolina, and her parents were heartbroken to see their baby go. Audrey wanted to go to Charlotte to land a job working with computers in 1990. When that unfortunately did not work out, she started working at a few Taco Bell restaurants. She found happiness hanging out with a group of young single people like herself. They would all go play basketball, have cookouts, and go to comedy clubs. Shauna Hawk was in this friend group, and so was Henry Wallace. By this point, of course, Shauna had been killed. Audrey had no idea she was so close to her friend Shauna's killer. She never met a stranger. She could strike up a conversation with anyone. She was bright and so friendly to everybody. Audrey was the happiest when she could get others to crack a smile or laugh. On June 22nd, Henry raped and strangled her as he did the other victims. Audrey was found 3 days later. Henry went to Taco Bell when the news had come out about Audrey being found and told Stephanie Cook, a co-worker, "Guess what? You aren't going to believe this. Audrey's dead." Audrey's body was taken back to her hometown in South Carolina by her loving parents, and her friends never did hear anything about her funeral. In August of 1993, Henry started living at Granville Apartments on North Sharon Amity Road, where he liked to get drunk and turn his music up loud. Neighbors noticed after a while that Henry never changed his clothes and seemed to be sleep deprived. One neighbor said she would feed him sandwiches and give him beer. Henry was the only person she had ever let into her apartment while she was alone. She had no idea she was in potential danger, and I'm sure she realized much later how lucky she was to be alive. As we will find out later, Henry was not your typical serial killer. He was very well liked among women, and most of these young women that he murdered ran in his circles. He was pretty much surrounded by women all of his life when you think about it. Being raised by a single mother, having a big sister, he was the only male cheerleader at his school, and fast food places usually have more young women working there than young men. So most of the people around him were young women, and they adored him. They thought he was gentle and kind. If any acquaintance or friend needed anything, they would go to Henry because he was always down to help in any way that he could. He made young women feel safe, special, would make them laugh, and help them through hard times. Maybe there was a part of him that was genuine, but also there's the possibility it was at least mostly an act to charm them and gain their trust in case he decided to do something to them. They would already be easy targets. His next victim was Valencia M. Jumper. She was a friend of Henry's sister Yvonne. The two young ladies met in Rock Hill, where they both went to Winthrop University. Valencia was a 21-year-old senior college student from Columbia, South Carolina, and the baby of her parents' 5 children. At the time, she was attending Johnson C. Smith University, majoring in computer science, making great grades, and she was working 2 jobs. Valencia was employed as a cashier at Food Lion and was a sales associate at Hex. At the beginning of August, she and her sister Vanessa spent time together. Valencia cooked dinner, and afterwards she unplugged everything and made sure everything was off. She was very careful and mindful all of the time, and that characteristic about her would cause red flags to raise about Valencia's subsequent passing. Valencia and Henry met each other 3 years prior to him killing her. In 1990, when Valencia was ringing up his groceries, he introduced himself. They did know each other for 3 years, and so did Valencia's family. Henry carried out his MO, raping and strangling Valencia on August 10, 1993. Henry set Valencia's body on fire to get rid of any evidence. Valencia's older sister Vanessa got the call from police that her sister had died. She couldn't believe her sister passed away from inhaling smoke during the fire in her apartment. Vanessa said it was not like Valencia at all to forget to turn her stove off and unplugging it before going to bed. She was so shocked and upset that the police told her they believed it was a tragic accident. Vanessa felt like something was off, and a little over 6 months later, she would find out her gut feeling was right. A few days after Valencia's death, her family laid her to rest. Henry accompanied his sister Yvonne to Valencia's funeral, and not only that, he sent Valencia's family his condolences too, just like he did with Shauna Hawk's family. 20-year-old Michelle Stinson was another college student who knew Henry from Taco Bell. She was attending Central Piedmont Community College, making great grades and working towards her dream career, a graphic artist. Michelle was taking desktop publishing, printing management, sculpture, and watercolor courses. Her graphic arts instructor did not understand why Michelle would occasionally fall asleep in his class. He knew how passionate she was about graphic art. He finally realized why she would fall asleep when one of her projects for class was all about managing stress and raising 2 children. Michelle's graphic arts instructor said after she did that project, he admired her even more for how courageous and determined she was, even though she was obviously juggling a lot of personal struggles. On September 14, 1993, Henry went to her apartment and raped her. A short time later, right in front of her children, Ernie, who was 3, and Nashawn, who was 1, Henry strangled Michelle and stabbed her to death in her kitchen. Later, one of Michelle's friends went to her apartment, and 3-year-old Ernie opened the door after the friend knocked, telling them, quote, "My mommy's asleep on the floor." This friend found Michelle deceased, face down on the kitchen floor. When police arrived, they did not see any evidence that there was a break-in. There did not seem to be a struggle between the killer and Michelle, and nothing seemed to be stolen. On February 4th, 1994, Henry was caught and arrested for shoplifting. At the time, police did not link him to the killings, and police are not even sure if they checked Henry's background, because if they had, the computer probably would have popped up his outstanding warrants for violating his parole in Washington. Instead, he was free to go and more lives were taken. One of the victims, Shauna Hawk, her mother was begging the community to find Shauna's killer on February 19, 1994. 25-year-old Vanessa Little Mack had a sister who worked at Taco Bell with Henry. Vanessa did not have an easy life, and she had 2 children, a little girl named Natara, who was 7, and Natalie, who was around 4 months old in February. Vanessa was trying to be a better person for herself and her children. She worked at Carolina's Medical Center. She really loved her job, and she cared so much about the patients there. Vanessa was always concerned and checking in on them, unlike some people who work at hospitals who don't show that empathy and care for patients. One of the patients passed away the year before, and it really broke Vanessa. She told her supervisor and friend Eunice Stratford, quote, "Everybody I get close to, they die, Miss Eunice." It was in 1992 when Vanessa's sister, Leslie, introduced Henry Wallace and her sister to each other. Leslie worked the food line at Taco Bell, and Henry was the manager. Leslie recalled being captivated by how he made everyone smile and laugh. Quote, "I needed to pick up on my speed, and he'd always come around and say, 'You move like my grandma.' And it was always something silly like that. He was just real funny. Everybody liked being around him because of that." One day, Leslie and Henry went out to lunch at a pizza parlor. They talked about music, mostly rap, because Henry loved it so much. On a second outing, Leslie invited her sister Vanessa to come out with them. They went to McDonald's and went back to Vanessa's place to eat. Leslie lived there with her sister and kids. The following day, Henry confessed a secret to Leslie. He really liked her sister. Leslie said, quote, "He always said there was something about her eyes that turned him on. He said they were slanted and just very pretty. He said that's what he always noticed in a woman were her eyes. He was an eye man." Henry began dropping by the apartment to supposedly hang out with Leslie, but he was always asking if Vanessa was there too. He would ask permission to drink any alcohol when Vanessa was present. Leslie could count on Henry whenever she was having issues with her boyfriend. He was a good listener, and she said he was like a brother to her. All the time at Taco Bell, he would constantly talk to Leslie about Vanessa. Leslie talked to her sister about it and asked her if she liked Henry, but Vanessa only liked him as a friend. She had eyes for someone else. Even though Henry knew this, he would still cater to Vanessa and anything she needed. He would take her around to run her errands and pick her youngest baby up from daycare, who Henry just seemed to adore. The very next day, after Shauna Hawk's mother was pleading for the public to help find her daughter's killer, Vanessa was raped and strangled to death by Henry inside her apartment. Barbara Rippey, the mother of Natara's father, was the one raising Natara until she was almost 5 years old. Vanessa won custody of her little girl. Then Barbara moved to Charlotte from where she was living in Florida. Barbara said, quote, "I was a mother to her. I used to tell her to watch who she associated with. We had our times, I'll tell you that." When Vanessa had custody of Natara, Barbara often babysat for Vanessa, and on the 20th, she was going to her apartment to babysit Vanessa's youngest baby, Natalie. Barbara was the one to find Vanessa that day, strangled with a towel. Barbara used to think Vanessa truly hated her, but she was pleasantly surprised when people who worked with Vanessa told her how much Vanessa would talk about her in the best ways at work. She would also tell them how much Barbara really helped her out. That made her feel really good that Vanessa really did appreciate her after all. Betty Jean Baucom turned 24 years old on March 7, 1994. The next day, she would be Henry's next victim. Betty and Henry's girlfriend worked together at the Bojangles, where Betty was the assistant manager. When Betty Jean was being interviewed for the position, in less than 10 minutes, Phil Locke, who interviewed her, said he knew right away she was the type of person he wanted to work as a manager, and on September 20th, 1993, the job was hers. Phil said, quote, "She had a lot of good qualities. She was a very nice young lady, a hard worker, dependable. She just had a very beautiful smile, and I never heard her use one word of profanity, even if she got burned or something." She had mentioned to Phil about working at a different Bojangles restaurant to be closer to her fiancé in the town of Sanford. They never got to sit down and really discuss the transfer in detail. March 8, 1994, after raping and strangling her, Henry stole many of Betty's items in her house that were worth some money, which meant he could go pawn these things to have some extra cash. Henry took off in Betty's car, pawned her things, and then ditched her car at a shopping center. Betty Jean's family had been calling the apartment complex staff because they were worried. They couldn't get in touch with her, and Betty Jean had not tried to get in touch with them for way longer than usual. A staff manager went to Betty Jean's apartment, finding her body, which had been there for at least 24 hours. After these young women were found at their apartments, which were all located in East Charlotte, the police were on high alert, actually looking for Henry because now they were suspicious. One former Bojangles employee who worked with Henry's girlfriend was Deborah Ann Slaughter, 35 years old. At the time, she was employed at a deli. Deborah was the oldest of her 4 siblings, and she had an 18-year-old son who resided in Atlanta, Georgia. Henry slithered his way into her apartment, held her at gunpoint, strangled her, raped her, and then stabbed her in the stomach and chest 38 times. When he was done, he stole her money so he could go buy drugs. Deborah was killed as police were investigating individual homicides. Deborah's parents, Alfonso and Lovey, were worried sick about Deborah as soon as they got the news that a woman had been strangled in the area she lived. Lovey went over to her daughters and unlocked the apartment door. She saw her daughter laying on the floor. At first, Lovey actually didn't think anything of it because her daughter had back problems and was seeing a chiropractor, so she would often stretch out to help with the back pain. But this time, that's not what was happening, and Lovey soon realized her daughter was not alive. Not long before Deborah was killed, Lovey had recently told her daughter to always be careful. When they discovered her, Alfonso told the newspapers, quote, "It was very devastating to us. She was a very happy girl. We are going to remember her as a very outgoing person, a very energetic person who loved people. With the Lord's help, we are going to be able to make it through. Deborah's family will never forget her contagious laughter. Her aunt called her a comedian, and how Deborah sang like an angel in the church choir. Deborah's aunt, Linda Ball, talked about how strong and tall Deborah was, and she wanted to know more about the attack and if her niece fought this man back. I think she was hoping Deborah really gave him one hell of a fight to the very end. After he murdered Deborah, he wasted no time going a half a mile away from the Glen Hollow apartments where Deborah lived to the Lake apartment complex to kill again. He was on a rampage. 18-year-old Brandy June Henderson was a college student in a relationship with Bernice Woods, and she was a stay-at-home mom who loved every second of being a mother. At the age of 2, Brandy's mother and father split up, and Brandy bounced around house to house, staying with her father's side of the family more than she did her mother's. Brandy dropped out of high school at one point, but she decided to go back to get her diploma. Then she studied at Central Piedmont Community College. Henry befriended Brandy and Bernice when they were all working together at a Golden Corral steakhouse. Bernice was at work, which Henry knew, so he went to their apartment raping Brandy as she held on tight to her baby. Afterwards, he strangled Brandy to death. Henry also choked the baby boy, but he did live. Bernice came home from work to find Brandy strangled with a towel, and baby Therese had towels strung around his neck as well. After the police spoke with the medical examiner, they saw a connection between the murders of Deborah and Brandy. Brandy's death was also linked to Vanessa's. Next, they would find Betty Jean Baucom in her residence at the Lake Apartments. Brandy was buried in a pretty pink dress on March 14, 1994, with a photo of her precious 10-month-old baby boy Therese Woods beside her heart. Around 200 family members and friends gathered into the church to say their last goodbyes to 18-year-old Brandy. At the funeral, her mother Deborah tried to keep her composure for as long as she could. She was trying to hold back her emotions, her tears, and mostly held back until everyone got to the gravesite, and she totally fell apart, sobbing loudly. Brandy's father, Clarence, and stepmother Dorothy sat in silence. Brandy's grandmother, Jessie, said, quote, "She was a good child. I hate that she's gone." January was the last time Brandy's mother, Deborah, had spoken to her daughter. Losing her was a wake-up call, reminding her how important family is. She said, quote, "All of these women who were killed have families. You've only got one family. Don't wait until one dies before you bring everybody together." Brandy's boyfriend, Bernice, held baby Therese as Amazing Grace was being sung by the choir at her funeral. He said, quote, "She was a wonderful person. That's about all there is to say about Brandy. It's a shame it happened. Just a shame." Brandy's cousin, Dolores, said, quote, "She was a sweet person who didn't bother nobody. I hate that this happened to her. She didn't deserve to die." Another cousin of Brandy's, Joe Henderson, remembered her sweetness and always seeing her grabbing her backpack and walking into the high school. The small things that go through your mind when someone passes away. Brandy's aunt, Dorothy Nance, said, quote, "She was my Brandy, my little cuddly Brandy. She was just a happy person, and she wanted me to be happy too." A member of Mothers of Murdered Offspring, Sally Miller, spoke at a candlelight vigil, saying, quote, "We are living in a very sad time when someone can take another person's life. It's time for Charlotte to wake up. It's time for the world to wake up. This should not have been. We call ourselves civilized. I don't see it anymore." Another thing that really tugged at my heartstrings even more, well, two things. Her mother said, "Goodbye, Brandy. Your body's cold, but your soul will never leave us." The second thing, Brandy's little cousin, 14-year-old Erin Harris, sang in front of the crowd a Boyz II Men song called "It's So Hard to Say Goodbye to Yesterday." If you know those lyrics, and imagine this 14-year-old boy singing that for his cousin, it is just heartbreaking. On March 9th, 1994, the police finally started alerting everyone in the area of East Charlotte that there was a serial killer prowling around and people needed to take precautionary measures, but that's all the public could know at the time. Someone close to the case disclosed one for sure thing that pointed to Henry Wallace was a TV and VCR he had stolen from one of the victim's apartments and sold. So the buyer knew those things were from Henry. Also, people in the community and his neighbors started to talk to investigators about Henry because he had a recent change in certain behaviors. On March 12th, police canvassed Old Statesville Road and around the woods. They eventually discovered the remains of Deborah Slaughter in her apartment. This is where we will conclude this episode. Next week, we will dive into the capture and arrest of Henry Wallace, his confessions, victims' family statements, the trial, and much more. Stay tuned for part 2. Until next week, you know the drill. Stay safe out there and take care of yourselves and each other.